you can still be surrounded by a flood of evidence that you can do what you're doing. And it still comes down to, but what do you believe? Like everyone else can believe in you. But at the end of the day, there still has to be this moment where you decide, okay, I'm just going to believe in me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Moeller, and on this podcast, we will be interviewing guests that have made their mark in real estate, in business, and in other areas of life. Listening to podcasts myself has helped me in so many different ways and continues to do so. If you're a real estate investor or an entrepreneur, or aspiring to be either, or just someone that wants to learn, you've come to the right place. An easy way to have an impact is to share this episode with friends or family, provide a review, or just spread the word. We greatly appreciate it, and now let's get to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the show. I'm really excited for this week's guest, James Robbins. James, how are you doing today?
Fantastic, Phil, and thanks for the invite on your show.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you, James, and get to know you more here. Just really interesting and impressive profile. Leadership expert, business strategist, best-selling author, 9 Minutes on Monday. I really want to get into that and really talking about leadership versus management. But before we get into all that, James, I just want to know, who are you? Tell me your story. And just kind of, how did you become who you are today?
Well, I grew up on a small cattle ranch in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, and life was simple, which shaped a lot of how I view the world. And it was just filled with good people, which really is the key foundation of all leadership, is just be a good person. And I was going to go, my dream was to become a film director, wanted to be like the next Steven Spielberg, but life threw me a curveball, and I ended up going into ministry. And I became a preacher for a lot of years, which I totally didn't expect. And that's really where I began to cut my teeth on leadership because, and John Maxwell talks about this, and he was an early mentor for me, as he started out also as a preacher. But when you work in a not-for-profit setting, so it doesn't have to be a church, but when you work in a not-for-profit setting and you've got to lead paid staff, but also volunteers, the volunteers, you can't fire them, you can't kick them out. I mean, you can, but it takes a lot. And so you really have to learn like how to influence people without the leverage of a position or a pay. And so that really gave me sort of my PhD in human motivation in all those years. And then, out of that, I began to realize, oh, I can start helping other people, grow in their leadership. And so that's when I started my company.
So first of all, John Maxwell, you're speaking my language. I love it. Leadership 101, how successful people think. He's had a big impact on me in my, attempt at being a good leader and leadership journey. So I love it. So you started in ministry and as a preacher and then got into business over time, it sounds like. So tell me more about that and kind of the transition, how this all came about.
You know how sometimes in life you have that disconnect where maybe you're working your job, or maybe if you're listening, you're leading your own company, but at the same time, something doesn't feel right. And you wonder, like, am I on the right path? And that's the question I began to ask myself in ministry, which seems strange because everyone always, applauds you for, following your calling. And, I believe that there was a calling early on, but I also felt this restlessness, like I wanted to do more, but I wasn't sure what. And so that was really the beginning of that, was me trying to think, what else could I do? Plus, if I'm really honest, there's a certain income ceiling in ministry, and not that you go into ministry for the money, but I had 3 kids and wanted to provide for them. So at first, I was just looking for something on the side. What could I do on the side? And I began speaking at conferences. And, over the years, I started making more on the side than I was preaching. And then I still did kind of both careers for a while. And then eventually I turned it over to someone else, and I just focused on my company.
Well, I think there's different ways. This is really interesting because as you said, it is maybe different, but it's really not, I don't think. And there's different ways um, to have an impact on people and influence a lot of people. You might have been speaking and preaching in ministry, but also then you're speaking and you're on big stages, writing a book, and that's having a lot of impact for the good as well. And even just the people you're leading in other ways. So first of all, I think there's a lot of different ways for people to lead and have an impact. And this isn't just about, well, I was called to be a preacher or a minister, and that's my only path I can do, right? We can have a positive impact in a lot of different ways. But I think the disconnect and the doesn't feel right, the restlessness, no matter how that comes about in people, I think that's a really, really real thing. That was the case for me when I was in the corporate world, and it's like, okay, I'm doing things, I'm kind of having an impact, I'm helping people with leadership, but is this really? It just didn't feel complete for me, and it took some courage to make the move. How was that transition hard for you to make the move? Did you feel good about it? Did it take a lot of courage to get that done?
It took a lot of courage. It took me longer than I should have. And how that even came about was, in fact, I did leave ministry for a while initially, like in 2008, and then the economy crashed. And then I was just grinding it out for 2 years of my business. I was like, this isn't working. And so I thought, I just got to go back to what I know, which is a familiar thing. So I went back into ministry for a while. Yeah, but the interesting thing was, it was during that time that I had written my book. So this sort of circles back around to John Maxwell. So John Maxwell was, the first leadership book I ever read was The 21 Laws of Leadership. And of course,
Mhm.
as a young preacher, I connected with him and his background. So after I wrote my book and it was doing well, I get invited, get this, I get invited by John Maxwell's team to go with him down to South America and train 1,000 business leaders. It was just him and I for like an entire day.
Wow.
So this was a huge moment for me, right? I tried to make it seem like it wasn't a huge moment at the time. I didn't want to be, all nerdy about it. But we went down there. It was just a fantastic day. Like it's just a surreal moment. I'm on stage, then he goes on stage. I mean, he was the main act. I was more there to like give him a break. But afterwards, he had said, "Hey, let's meet up when we get back to the States." And so I went down to where he lives, and he was gracious enough to have lunch with me. And I asked him the question because then I was still in ministry and I was in this, should I take the leap? Should I not? So this would be, a parallel to you're working in a corporate job and
Yeah.
you're like, should I start my own thing? It was just really like that. And I asked John, I said, how did you know? And he said he had gone on a business trip to go and speak to an audience. And then he got back on the plane to fly back to San Diego where he was ministering. And he remembers thinking, like, I don't want to go back. And he said that for him was the sign that, ministry is one of those places that when it becomes a job, then that's usually
Yeah.
a yellow flag, like something's got to change. And so as he said that, I was like, oh, I've had that moment like, years ago. I just never did it. What I find now when I look back, whenever you make a leap like that, really what you're doing is you're going all in on yourself. I didn't know that at the time, but that's really what it is. And I think that's what held me back for so long of making that transition faster was just my own insecurity, self-doubt. And there's something about when you, at least for me, when you're in one career, right? So for me, it was ministry. There was always this insecurity of, well, what do I know about business, right? What do I know about a Fortune 500 company, a Fortune 100 company? And yet at the same time, I was working with them and producing results and helping their people because people are people, right? When you're talking about leadership, it's just a different context. So,
Yeah.
so much of what holds us back in life is just how much do you believe in yourself? And
Yeah.
that self doubt held me back way longer than it should have.
You're hitting a chord here because I like uh, part of like what I'm trying to do here, honestly, is I see so much potential in people, and I see so many people that, first of all, I'm not knocking any specific careers because you went in a different direction than maybe what people are thinking about sometimes, right? But look at yourself, look at John Maxwell and the impact you're having because of the direction you went, because you did take the leap, you did make the jump. But I see so many people not they have this restlessness, they're wanting to do more, but they have the insecurity and self-doubt. And I'll just tell those people, like, you got to go find out, you got to go test yourself, and you got to build the confidence to make the leap. So I think that's where I want to go here is how did you get over the self-doubt, the insecurities? Like what was it educating yourself? Was it associating with others that gave you the confidence or guided you? How did you get how like what things did you do to build up the courage to make this leap?
There was definitely no one thing, but life leaves life leaves a trail. And when there were certain moments for me that, like number one, I remember going to an HR conference. I was speaking at this HR conference, this big HR conference, and there was this guy who is sort of known as like expert in the industry in motivation, human motivation, and I had just been studying that so much. And I remember I sat in his session, and like everything he said, and every study he cited, and even the psychologist names, I'm like, I know that, I know that, I know that, I know that. It was kind of this moment of you know a lot more than you give yourself credit for. It's like that curse of knowledge, right? We don't realize how much we know, but then add that to your experience. I mean, Phil, you have a certain experience that I don't, so you're able to speak in certain areas that I can't, and vice versa. Everybody is like that, and but I wrote my book 9 Minutes on Monday, and that came out of just research and working with companies. But this is a true story. When McGraw-Hill decided that they were going to pick up my book, this guy, the senior editor, he called me up and he says, "Hey, I got good news. We're gonna buy the rights to your book." And my first question in my mouth was, "Did you read it?" Like I literally was like, because if you read it, you would realize that I'm not a good writer and it probably sucked. And he laughed and chuckled. He was like, "Yeah, of course I read it." But that was my first question, which shows that there was just that. Is this any good? So things like that. Then even going down and training with John Maxwell and lots of people. Um, but here's what I've learned: like you can still be surrounded by a flood of evidence that you can do what you're doing, and it still comes down to, but what do you believe? Like everyone else can believe in you, but at the end of the day, there still has to be this moment where you decide, okay, I'm just going to believe in me. And I think for me, where if I could go back and change one thing, it would be that I wish I had installed more of a growth mindset earlier. Just this idea of I don't have to prove anything, I'm just here to learn. And everything I try, and even if it doesn't work, I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to get better. And to separate my ego from the result. I wish I had done that earlier in life. Then, I would probably be a lot further ahead than I am now, but I'm happy, obviously, where I am.
Well, first of all, I think I'm loving this conversation. I'll just say that right now, James. This is fantastic, and I think growth mindset, and whether that's education, learning from others, I think those things are critical to build it, to tie it back to building the courage to make the moves as well. Eventually, you have to believe in yourself and just make the leap. And you can't say, I'm going to read 1,000 books before I go buy a real estate investment or start a business or go do this or go do that. You can't do it forever. You eventually have to take action. You have to have the courage to do it. But the growth mindset is an easy, like for sure, it will help support that. And if you're not ready or you're thinking about it, learning and growing is so important. And I think it's part of building up the courage to take the actions. And then once you start to build the courage to take actions, by the way, you're going to realize, oh, maybe it didn't go perfect, but I learned a lot from that, and I'm going to go take more action, do different things. So um, I just appreciate that conversation. And now we're shifted to where, okay, we started the business, we're kind of building the business. What did that look like? And what was critical? What were maybe some setbacks in building the business? What did you learn about leadership through that process that we can talk about?
I had so many failures early on. So initially, the business started as just, I'm going to go and speak at events. I'm going to be like a speaker. So it wasn't even so much leadership training, although it was, but it was in a conference setting. And because that allowed me to go and honestly make as much in 1 hour that I was making an entire month in the ministry. So it fit. I could do both. And I wasn't sitting with clients, 8 hours a day. So that's where that began. It was it was when 2008 happened and everybody canceled all their speaking engagements, which was a lot like the pandemic as well. That's when I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. So let me transition. And that's when I began creating online. I started doing online events. So, like every setback, it was an adjustment, which then added to my business. So then I started, okay, let me create workshops online, and then let me create an online course, and let me write a book. And all of that actually came out of a out of an economy that had stalled and me just scrambling to go, I got to figure out what's next. So that's really how things began to grow. And the more I worked with companies, especially when I wasn't doing ministry anymore and I really had time to, get in the trenches with some companies, that's when I learned a lot more, but I also was able to apply a lot of the wisdom that I didn't even realize I'd picked up over the years, and in a sense began to settle down. Like Phil, I've spoken, I don't know, 3,000 times, and like I said, I grew up on a cattle ranch. I was this shy, introverted, freckled-faced redhead, deathly afraid to speak in public, but ministry forced me to get on stage. But
Yeah.
for 3,000 speeches, I mean, 2,000 of those were like, I could die here. It was a constant, like, this is difficult for me. And kind of back to the point
Wow.
you made about courage and taking action. If I was going to pat myself on the back for one thing, it would be that I have continually stepped out of my comfort zone despite my self doubts. So the idea that you have to, I said earlier about going all in on you, that's more of an action than it is a feeling. There's still
Yeah.
times I will wrestle with if I walk into a situation, a Fortune 100 company calls me and I got to go there. I'm still going to have to check myself at the door because I know those ghosts of insecurity are going to come up. They're
Yeah.
like, what do you know about this? And then I just calm them back down. So, anyways,
I, I just think it's important to recognize insecurities for like we're human. Like you're going to have those. And like, so again, it's just to tie it back to people that are thinking about doing different things, making moves. They feel like they need the courage to leap. And by the way, sometimes courage and taking action isn't, it's just consistency, right? It's just being consistent and being committed to doing it over and over again. And you did that. The other thing you said that I think the word you used that I like is adaptability. And if you're, you know, if you have a growth mindset and you're learning, it's going to put you in a position where when you take that leap, it isn't like you have to have the exact outcome defined. As you're going through that process, the ability to adapt is a critical skill that I think is important to recognize and recognizing take the leap and you don't have to have everything figured out right now because as you get into it, you can adapt. So I appreciate that commentary. So I want to talk about the book a little bit and just the lessons of, you said it's leadership versus management. You talked earlier, which was really interesting about a nonprofit and you learned from, by the way, John Maxwell, real quick on a tangent. If there's any way to connect me, I will nerd out with him. I would totally do that. So just so you know, I completely appreciate that. He's an amazing person and he's, a man of faith, having a great impact, impacting just millions of people. So I have a ton of respect for John Maxwell, and I can definitely appreciate how you probably felt in that situation. Um, but the book now, so I lost my train of thought for a second. Managers and leaders, and you talked about it you learned this from not having the leverage that a lot of I'll say managers have in business, but you didn't have that leverage of money or discipline or title or whatever it might be, which isn't leadership, by the way. That's management. So what is leadership to you?
yeah, I'll see a lot of posts on LinkedIn where they'll say, a manager is this, and it's all these negative things, but a leader is this, and I think those are unfortunate. I've probably written stuff like that earlier in my career, but you know, management is definitely a function of leadership, and it's kind of strange we call people managers. but it's a function of leadership. There's certain tasks and things you got to do. There's strategy. This is a lot of execution and holding people accountable and making sure the team. But leadership is the umbrella over all of that. And leadership at the end of the day is about moving people. In the book, I open up with telling a story about us climbing a mountain in Bolivia and where we were struggling and we got stuck on the side. Well, I talk about the mountain guide in the stories. His name was Osvaldo, and I when I'm speaking in a live audience, I'll say this. I'll say, when you take a look at Osvaldo, like as a mountain guide, if you rewind in his life for a while, he was just a mountain climber. And you can climb solo and it can be very technical. But at some point, he was so good at that somebody suggested, why don't you become a mountain guide? Why don't you come work for the company? But to go from mountain climber to mountain guide, an incredible shift has to happen inside the mind of this man. Because as a mountain guide, I mean, think about this, as a mountain guide, it's actually no longer about the mountain. Success for him is now, can he move people up mountains? And if he can't move people, it doesn't matter how good at the mountains he is. And so, Phil, when you think about it, all of us come to leadership pretty much the same way, right? Anyone who's listening to this and you're a leader, it's because you worked hard, you were dependable, people trusted you, there was a need, there was a shoulder tap, you were good at what you were doing. But most of us got into leadership without any sort of proving that we can move people. And then we get put into this job where your complete scoreboard, like whether you are successful or not, is now hinged on, can you move people? And in fact, if you can't move people and if you make a mess of it, then people quit, you cost the company money. And my first venture into leadership was because all my bosses above me quit. I just showed up on the night shift one night at a meat packing plant. And they said, oh, by the way, you're in charge. Like, wait, what? Yeah, your boss quit. So all of a sudden now I'm the leader. So this is just part of the challenge for leaders. And, the staggering thing is most people come into leadership without any sort of leadership training. And it kind of makes sense. It's a little bit like going to baby parenting classes before you've had a baby. It's helpful a little bit, but until you walk home with that, crying and screaming, little infant, then wow, now it's real.
I think that's, you're bringing me back a lot. And I think that first level of leadership where you're transitioning from doer to leader, and I love the analogy, by the way, the mountain climber versus mountain guide. You're now dealing with people, you're dealing with your emotions, motivation. There's all kinds of things that mountain guide has to do versus just climb the mountain and worry about his own emotions only, right? There's so many different aspects of it. And I think that first level of leadership, there's so many people that have the capability or the potential for leadership, but they're just not ready yet. And they're going to learn it in that process. That's okay, by the way. But I think if you want to get to that level and if you want to have success, like I think leadership is just an important thing to study. You talked about, I think, human behavior and studying that when you were younger, but I think leadership and understanding yourself, by the way, self-leadership, I think is really important in understanding yourself. All of that will help you become a better leader of people, which just, if you want to have an impact, if you want to do good things, if you want to start a business and have courage, whatever those things are, I think leadership is so foundational. So I appreciate that. And I think that first level is so hard. Where did this, you talked a little bit about your story, but where did this mindset, you talked about growth mindset and you wishing you had a growth mindset earlier, but it seems like you had a strong mindset early on. Where did that, or was there a transition there? I want to come back to that a little bit. Where did that come from?
I think that I probably had more of a growth mindset than I gave myself credit for. I mean, I remember still being in ministry and thinking, okay, I got to learn how to find business. And I'd be on the phone with an HR executive and they're telling me oh, we have a large span of control. And I'm just like, what did she just say? I would have no idea of just even what span of control. I would have to pretend I knew until I could go look up the word. And there was a lot of that, but it was just me throwing myself in. But, when you think about growth mindset, if there was one area, a lot of this comes out of, Carol Dweck's work, at least the nomenclature, right?
Yep.
if there was an area I would push back on with her work with the growth mindset is this idea of, in a sense, that you're either this or that. I find that I am not naturally in a growth mindset, but when I can put myself there, it makes a difference. And so, as an example, I think maybe it was 2 years ago, I found out that there's this storytelling competition uh, all around America. I didn't know it's called the Moth. And maybe you've heard about it before, but anyways, every month there's in every city, they have these storytelling competitions. People just come in, they put their names in a hat, they draw out names, and 10 people get picked, and they have to tell a story on stage for 5 minutes, and they get judged. So I'm like, I wonder if there's one where I live. And so I looked it up, and there was, and it was like in 2 weeks. And I thought, oh, I'm going to go to that. And then I thought, I should I should put my name in the hat. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Like, first go and see what it is, right? Like, I've never been to this thing before. But there was the other side of me is like, no, go put your name in. So right away we've got the fixed mindset, growth mindset wrestling
Yeah.
match. And because, now I teach about growth mindset to leaders, I was like, no, you need to do it. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I show up that night, and it was like this big theater auditorium with like a balcony, and it was packed. And I thought there'd be like 10 people here.
Yeah.
There's hundreds. So I put my name in, and I went back, and I had invited my kids, and I sat down by my daughter. And then I looked at her and I said, did you ever do something that you immediately regretted? And she sort of laughed. And I said, well, as long as I don't get picked first. And honest to goodness, they're like, first storyteller of the night. They pulled out James Robbins. I was like,
Murphy's
no.
Law, right? Murphy's
Yeah,
Law. The only guarantee was that was going to happen.
exactly. So I go and I tell the story. I go over my time. I don't use the secret word you're supposed to use, and I'm first. But at least when I was done, the good news, I was in first place until the next one went and the next one went, and I just started falling down the board. And by the time it ended, I was in sixth place. Now get this. I can guarantee you there's no one in that auditorium who has been on stage more than I have. And I just get wiped out in a local storytelling competition. And so I was driving home, and I was like ego hurt about this. And once I kind of processed it, I had to laugh. I was like, that's funny, that I for sure I would be the most experienced there, and I just got wiped out. That's actually funny. But so that's just an example of the
Yeah.
wrestling between growth mindset, fixed mindset. At least I'm not just this natural growth mindset person. I got to keep reloading it. It's like it discharges, and I got to reload it again. Oh yeah, step into this mode of
Yeah.
of just learning.
I like that. I mean, growth mindset is a skill to build. I want to just hit you mentioned Carol Dweck. So for our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about mindset, her book is called Mindset by Carol Dweck. The other thing I want to just point out is as you're telling that story and it comes out throughout the conversation, I appreciate your humility. And I want to come back to the book. So you said you talk about growth mindset in the book. What are some of the other big lessons in the book that we should take away?
A lot of the book came out of the fact that as I was working with uh, leaders, right, I would go in and do a workshop, maybe for a company. I would teach them some great principles. But after a while, I began to realize these people are so busy that they're going to struggle to implement any of this. And I thought that's the problem today is managers are so busy. They're, running at 1,000 miles an hour. And when you break down the core aspects of motivation, especially in a work environment, this is where the book is built around these 9 engagement drivers. These 9 engagement drivers, they are, well, exactly that. They are drivers of engagement. And they are ways that we meet psychological and emotional needs of people. And when we do that, it creates motivation. So, for example, the need to be more than a number, right? This is something that employees want to know, that they're not just a number in the company. They don't want to be used. They don't want to be tossed aside. They think, am I just going to be discarded when you can replace me with AI? Or do you actually care about me? And that belief for them absolutely changes their performance.
Yeah.
So 9 Minutes on Monday was created in a way of how can you take the most powerful motivators of human beings, distill them down into these small micro moments that even the busiest of managers can tap into. I think that's why it's been, so popular as a book and as a framework, with the course that we teach on it, because managers, there's a sense of relief. They're like, okay, I can do this, because we're only asking them to make these tiny micro goals.
You did enough definitely to pique my interest because man, the more than just a number. I just remember think like it's so I think that's so important to say. The other way of saying is if you're not a number, no, you have a real purpose here. We need you. The company needs you. You're a big contributor, right? That's the opposite of you're just a number. So I think that's so important. One of our core values is just alignment on just are we aligned on purpose and faith with what we're doing? So um I love it. What are any other ones? I don't want to give away too much of the book, but just any other of the nine. I'm like
Well,
you piqued my
you just hit
interest,
on one of
James.
them, and that is the need for purpose and significance. Right? So people need to feel purposeful in their work. But here's the thing: I don't care who you work for. You can work for UNICEF, and you can forget that you are helping save children from poverty, because you got to fill out reports, you got to file for grants, you
Yeah.
got someone saying, "Have you done this?" So where we come in, and this is an important message for all leaders, is especially if you run a company, you're the most connected to the purpose of your company. In fact, the reason you started your company might even be just because you didn't want to work for someone else, right? That it was driven by some kind of purpose. But your whatever your company does, you provide a service or a product. Nobody really wants your product or service. They hire them for some reason. And what we have to do is we have to constantly make a bridge between the good we do and the employees. And sometimes that's helping, if you're in a larger company, sometimes it's helping them make a connection to how they serve within. So, like, there's a couple of questions you can ask yourself, like, who do we really serve? The answer is not clients, right? Who do we serve? What job is our product or service really hired to do? Like, I was working with a day spa, and they sold cosmetics, and their funnel was sort of, they would give free makeovers, and then they would try to upsell the cosmetics. But the whatever the name, beauticians or estheticians or something, they were not doing the upsells. And so, I asked them, well, what you have a product, but why do people buy your product? And they said, well, women buy makeup to feel beautiful. And I'm like, yeah, so that's the job you do. Isn't that a pretty cool job, actually? You get to come to
Right.
work. Like, they would probably tell their friends, I'm in sales, but no, you're not. You get to make women feel beautiful.
Right.
That's pretty cool. So it was just getting them to think differently. And no sooner had we done that, as a woman had a makeover, and she went to pay at the counter, and then she said, "Oh, I feel so confident." And I said, you take that sound bite and get that back to your employees as hey, remember, I know we're here to sell, but don't forget the bigger reason we're here. And so it's our job as leaders to continually remind people of how they're making a difference.
Yeah.
Um, I guess if I was going to give one more, I don't mind giving them all, but I know we don't have time. But the other one is, the need to grow and develop. And so again, when we get so busy, what happens is we don't coach and develop our staff because we just don't have time. We're just trying to
Yeah.
meet customers' needs. But the idea is, if you can have some regular one-on-ones with your employees, and part of that one-on-one, yeah, part of it's to talk about their performance, but another part's to talk about their growth. And what are you growing in? Even if you're not coaching per se, but you're just shining a light on their development and saying, what's next for you? What are you trying to get better in? How's that going?
Yeah. I love all those. I mean, growth mindset, but the growing and developing them, helping them even build their growth mindset. I tell you, the purpose and contribution. And what I like about that is, you know, whoever your customers or clients are, how are you serving them? And it's so easy to give I will say a tactical answer to that. But if you can tie, I guess what I heard from that discussion is if you can tie what you're doing to feelings and emotions for your customers and how you're making that person feel what their outcome is from an emotional perspective, I think that can create a deeper sense of purpose. So I appreciate it. And honestly, this has been amazing, James. I think I'd like to keep going here, but we can't do that. Um, we're gonna button up here, but I want to come back to that feeling question, and bringing emotion to our customers is good, but I want you to step back and reflect. You've been on this journey. You've done some different things. You've had a lot of impact. You've spoken, and you've been the best speaker at most of the conferences you were at. Maybe not maybe you didn't win the competition, but if you step back and reflect for what you do, the impact you're having, how does it make you feel?
That's a great question, and one that I need to remind myself of more. When I have a chance to speak at a conference, often I don't get to know what happens, right? People, go and maybe they'll send the odd email, but when we go in and now work with companies where we're helping them shift their culture, and then I hear comments back about, hey, I completely see this differently now, or I hold my people accountable now, or it's just we're happier here. Actually, the comments that mean the most to me is when they say like, hey, morale's really improved, people are happier, because in that way I feel like, okay, I had a little bit of an impact on a lot of people by just helping the leaders, right? So if I can help the leaders, I know that they're going to have a big impact on everyone they lead. So yeah, that's a good feeling for sure.
Awesome. I love that. Just looking forward, what is going to be important for you to be successful moving forward?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What, just for you personally, as you move forward in your journey, what is going to be the key to your success moving forward?
I have a new book coming out, which is a bit more about mindset than it is leadership. Although there's a crossover, of course. I think for
Yeah.
me, the focus is always not letting my creativity get the best of me and go off on a million tangents, and just, hey, like, focus in on taking your journey that you've had so far and continuing to expand it and help people. So I think that's the focus for me.
Yeah, I love it. And mindset, leadership, I love those topics. So definitely encourage people to check out your book. How can our listeners, how can they find out more about you, James?
Thanks for asking, Phil. You can go to jamesrobbins.com. That's two B's in Robbins, jamesrobbins.com. And please find me on LinkedIn and let me know that you were on Phil's show.
Awesome. James, this has been amazing. I mean, leadership, growth mindset, bringing purpose to work, just the self-worth and just making a bet on ourselves as you said it. And so many good nuggets from this. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks so much.
Phil, thanks for having me.
For the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast, signing off. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. We hope you found today's episode helpful. If you know current or aspiring investors or entrepreneurs or anyone that would benefit from today's episode, we appreciate you sharing it with them, or better yet, providing us a 5-star review. To learn more about Moeller Real Estate, visit our website at www.moellerre.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter or local events via our website. In closing, I encourage you to be purposeful in all areas of life, educate yourself, network with others that have been successful, take action, and lead. Thank you.